Good afternoon to our viewers on Parliament Channel 11 and our listeners on Parliament Radio 105.5 FM. We are about to start this press conference that has been called by the Joint Select Committee on Human Rights, Equality and Diversity, as the committee will seek to bring to the attention of the national public the findings of the third report of the JSC on Human Rights, Equality and Diversity on an inquiry into the treatment of child offenders at the Youth Training Centre, the St. Michael's Interim Rehabilitation Centre for Young Male Offenders, and the St. Jude's Interim Rehabilitation Centre for Young Female Offenders. With us this afternoon are three members of the committee. I'll introduce firstly the chairman of the committee, Dr. Nyan Gatsby-Dolly, who's seated at the center. To the chairman's right is committee member Randall Mitchell, and to the chairman's left is committee member Vidya Gayadeen Gopi Singh. At this time, we would hand over to the committee to update members of the public on the findings of the report.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good afternoon to the media, my fellow committee members, and the listening public. My name is Dr. Nyan Gatsby-Dolly, Chairman of the Joint Select Committee on Human Rights, Equality and Diversity. This committee is mandated to consider and report to Parliament on compatibility of acts of Parliament with human rights and any matters relating to human rights in Trinidad and Tobago. Government compliance with national and international human rights instruments to which Trinidad and Tobago is a party, and the promotion of measures designed to enhance the equalization of opportunities and improvement in the quality of life and status of all peoples, including marginalized groups, on the basis of gender and age, disability, and the creation of an inclusive and more equitable society through greater social justice and sustainable human development within Trinidad and Tobago. The committee resolved at its sixth meeting to inquire into the treatment of child offenders at the Youth Training Centre, the YTC, St. Michael's Interim Rehabilitation Centre for Young Male Offenders, and St. Jude's Interim Rehabilitation Centre for Young Female Offenders, and agreed that the following objectives would guide the inquiry. 1, to evaluate the implementation of the physical, infrastructural, and management recommendations within the following reports. The second report of the Child Protection Task Force 2012, the 2014 Parliamentary Committee Report on the Statutory Authorities Service Commission, the 2002 final report of the Cabinet-appointed Task Force on Prison Reform, and the 2013 report, No Time to Quit, by Professor Selwyn Ryan. To evaluate the extent to which the Youth Training Centre and St. Jude's Interim Rehabilitation Centre for Young Female Offenders and St. Michael's Interim Rehabilitation Centre for Young Male Offenders are fulfilling their aims and objectives, and to examine the difference in treatment of female and male child offenders. A public hearing was held on November 4, 2016, with officials such as representatives from the Office of the Prime Minister, the Children's Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, representatives from St. Michael's Interim Rehabilitation Centre for Young Male Offenders, St. Jude's Interim Rehabilitation Centre for Young Female Offenders, representatives from the Commissioner of Prisons and the Superintendent of Prisons with responsibility for YTC. In order to verify oral and written evidence received, the committee conducted site visits to all three institutions on November 16, 2016. Based on the evidence gathered, there were the following key findings. 1, the absence of a human resource policy to address the issues of internal abuse at the rehabilitation centers, as there were 2 reported cases of abuse at St. Michael's and 21 at St. Jude's over the past 5 years. 2, due to staff shortages, St. Michael's in particular, the needs of the young men are inadequately addressed, and the staff culture at the facility was one of the main challenges faced by the management. 3, Lack of care shown by male child offenders, coupled with the lack of specialized professionals on the permanent establishment, negatively affects the mandate of the facility. 4, there was an absence of strategic plans for St. Michael's and the Youth Training Center. 5, the lack of statistical data on recidivism across all 3 institutions in order to track the rate of recidivism of child offenders. 6, a common issue identified by each institution was the lack of concern shown by the relatives of child offenders and abandonment by the family upon entering the facility. And 7, it was noted that there are no rehabilitative programs at St. Michael's for the young male offenders. I will now call on our member, Mrs. Gaideen Gopi Singh, to present the recommendations for the first objective.
Thank you kindly. Thank you kindly. I will present some of the recommendations for the first objective. The committee recommends that 1, priority is placed on the creation of a long-term solution for placement and rehabilitation of female child offenders. 2, the creation of human resource policies that provide for the expeditious investigation of abuse reports. 3, the maintenance of the facility to be done by the staff and young men at the institution to foster a sense of responsibility and accomplishment in the child offenders. 4, additional male staff are employed at St. Michael's in order to provide a more positive male influence for the young offenders. 5, the recruitment of specialized staff should be addressed as a matter of urgency within 3 to 6 months. 6, the need to increase the budgetary allocation to YTC to complete outstanding renovations. Thank you.
I would now call on Minister Mitchell to present the recommendations for the second and third objectives.
Thank you very kindly, Madam Chair. I will now present some of the recommendations for the second objective. With respect to the second objective, the committee recommends that 1, the need for the Office of the Prime Minister to implement the Children's Registry to track the progression of children in conflict with the law. 2, the Statutory Authorities Service Commission and the Children's Authority must provide mandatory capacity building training for staff on the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and basic social work and rehabilitative methods. 3, St. Michael's needs to seek assistance from the Ministry of Community Development, Culture and the Arts to develop and establish rehabilitative programs through culture at that institution. 4, the YTC works in tandem with various trade schools such as YTEP and other organizations like CPEP to further the vocational skills of offenders at the center. 5, the remedial teaching methods embraced by St. Jude's and YTC must be tailored to improve and encourage the transition into other mainstream education and vocational institutions. 6, the Office of the Prime Minister should seek the assistance of the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs to draft legislation to prevent parents from abandoning children who are in conflict with the law at the rehabilitation centers and YTC. I will complete the presentation with recommendations of the third objective. And with respect to the third objective, the committee recommends that 1, the model used to develop the rehabilitative programs at St. Jude's and YTC should be adopted at St. Michael's. And 2, the legislation should be amended to allow YTC to provide accommodation for male child offenders under the age of 16 years on criminal and capital offenses. I'll now hand you back over to the Chairman.
Thank you very much. So having presented our findings and our recommendations, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the stakeholders who would have contributed, whether written or oral submissions, to the committee in order to complete this inquiry proposal. I would now like to turn you back over to our chairperson.
At this time, we invite questions from the members of the media.
Good afternoon, Richard Lord from the Trinidad and Tobago Guardian. Madam Chairman, in your investigation, in your inquiries, in your site visits that were conducted, what would you say would be some of the more critical issues to be addressed that has to be addressed as of, let's say, yesterday, so to speak?
The most critical issue that we observed would definitely be the situation of the boys that's in Michael's home. There is, at present, overcrowding in the rehabilitation center. There are about twice as many boys as cells were prepared for offenders. In addition to that, there has not been the institution of programs for rehabilitation. So the young boys are, one, in an overcrowded position, and in addition to that, they do not have the programs that would allow them to take up their time and actually become better at their social skills and so on. So that is one of the most critical things I think that need to be dealt with that came out of the inquiry.
In the wake of the existing economic situation, I believe that that particular home is a private-run home, to the best of my knowledge, probably with government assistance to some extent. Do you think it is possible that the home could address some of the concerns based on the existing conditions economically in the country today?
Yes, it is possible because there are associations the home can make and already have made based on our visits and so on, to be able to start some of these programs through the Ministry of Community Development, Culture and the Arts. They can access skills training as well as cultural programs that will assist the young boys to have worthwhile activities to engage themselves in.
Again, based on what you all would have done, have you gotten the impression that there is an increase in child abuse at these homes throughout the country? Do you get that impression?
Well, your question really leads into our current inquiry proposal, which deals with child abuse, and we just had a public hearing on that today. And I have not, or we did not question persons in St. Michael home. However, we did question persons dealing with abused children, officials from the Children's Authority, as well as from the Child Welfare League, as well as the Ministry of Education did have an input today, and it was indicated that there is an increase, or there seems to be an increase in child abuse based on the data that is available at this time.
Well, I know Minister Randall is an attorney, to the best of my knowledge, and he did mention a while ago about the need for legislation to be drafted by the Attorney General's office to deal with certain concerns. Minister, do you see this as being something that would meet with opposition by the homes in terms of to have the parents not abandon their children at the home? Do you think that is something that could be seen to be acceptable in the country based on the proposal you spoke about?
I don't. I mean, I think the country is very much concerned with children, the rights of a child, and abuse in children. I mean, recent media reports really center on that concern, and I don't see that there would be any opposition at all from the persons who manage these homes to more legislation governing the running of these homes.
Another concern raised would have been staff shortage. How feasible do you think it is to have qualified people begin to function at these homes? There could be a shortage of those types of people in the country in terms of being qualified. How feasible do you think that is for it to happen? Maybe the chairman can answer, maybe a member.
A lot of these staff at the home are appointed by the Statutory Authority Service Commission, and some of the homes have taken the initiative to hire people on contract to be able to service, the inmates and the offenders, because they realize that without this type of service, they are not going to fulfill their mandate, which is rehabilitation. So it is not necessarily a difficult thing, but of course, yes, you have funding becomes a problem when there isn't enough to facilitate the hiring on contract. So that is the dichotomy that exists. But most of the homes have taken the initiative, and it's not a shortage or a dearth of professionals. It's just a matter of getting the vacancies filled and or being able to afford to hire them on contract.
Okay, and where does the committee go from here now that we have reached this point? What's the next step for the committee?
Now that we've laid this report in Parliament, then the different ministries and institutions will be advised of the recommendations and will report to the committee on how they intend to implement the recommendations and so on.
Since we have no more questions from the media, we would like to thank our viewers on Parliament Channel 11 on Radio 105.5 FM for tuning in to this press conference being put on by the Joint Select Committee on Human Rights, Equality and Diversity. We thank the members of the committee for their time in coming out to update the public on the findings of the latest report submitted by the committee. And we also thank our members of the media for coming out to this press conference today. At this time, we take you back to our regular programming.